Well, it's been raining, I would say significantly. Everything's got a really good dousing, which to be honest, we needed because things were drying out a bit. But it does mean that it limits what you can do. It's given the plot a good watering, which that saved me an enormous job. And there are things I'm wanting to do out here, but we're just going to have to sit back for a while. And it does sort of force you inside the polytunnel and get some of the jobs done that are required in there. Let's have a quick look. I've been absolutely amazed how quickly things are growing. You might have caught a glimpse of those cabbages the other day when it was really warm and they were just wilting. But just look at the size. Fantastic plants in next to no time. And if you have any worries about things catching up, well, this is evidence that they do really. And you can see how many of those runner beans have come up. Every 24 hours it's different, and things are just moving on so quickly. I thought yesterday coriander was a dud, but today I can see coriander coming up in reasonable quantities. I was also getting a bit worried about my small sugar pumpkins, because all these had come up. The spaghetti, the little gem, this is the ichikuri, that's the winter luxury, but the two small sugar rows, nothing. And then this morning I noticed this bit of soil pushed up. Well, yeah, I think we're just getting some leaf growth under there, so that's good news. So everything is doing really nicely. But when you get weather like this, it's a good opportunity to address those things that are a bit pressing, like these Celeriac, which definitely need to be potted on. Let's have a quick look at what else we've got. I think most things are okay. I do want to start looking at these two tomatoes. They need pinching out. So these were given to me. These are a super sweet cherry tomato, and they were grown in some quantity by my neighbour, who said would I like a couple, and I said well, I'll give them a try, which is very nice of them. And I'm going to allow those to throw out a couple of side shoots. That was his advice, but I'm just going to wait until they get to about this height. So I'm going to leave this one and leave that one. And the side shoots, he says, once you get a truss on them, pinch them out and just work on the basis of one truss per shoot. And that seems to have given him great success. So if he succeeded with that method, I'm certainly going to try it. And my money maker probably approaching potting on now, so I might get to do those. And I did pinch out the other day my Latar. I noticed there's still one or two side shoots coming out, and the strawberries have set nicely. We've got lots of strawberries developing now on them, so that's good to see. When it gets a bit cooler like this, they're feeling moist enough. I'm not going to water probably anything today, so it should be a straightforward potting on for a bit. Let's see how I get on. Right, my hat's off, my jacket's off. Oh, that's great to see. I've actually got my first parsnip coming out. In fact, there's 2 or 3 coming out, 4, 5, once you start to see them. So parsnips on their way as well, so that's good news. Right, I'm going to put this one out of the way for a while. And typically there's a slug gathered under there. They seem to get everywhere, and you just have to keep on top of them. Right, I'm going to put my Celeriac into here and just push them out. I've got 1, 2, 3 varieties here, and I've had some come up of all of them, so there's too many for my needs here. But as is the nature of Celeriac seed, it's quite fine. Some of it fails. I've got a complete failure there, so it's always well just to sow a few together. And typically, here's a nice bunch. you can see what a root trainer does in terms of long roots. But I have got probably 6 plants in there, so I'm going to pot on only the ones I really need, and then probably offer these to anybody on the allotment who fancies growing some celeriac. Got a stinging nettle in there because I did grow into some sifted molehill soil, so that has produced a few odd weeds. Okay, so I'm going to get some pots ready, because I think I'm going to put these in a decent sized pot now, and a bit like the cabbage, get them grown on a bit before I pop them in the bed. Okay, pots. So every year with celeriac I learn a little bit more. I think it's worth sharing. It's probably the 4th year that I've grown celeriac, and what I've learned is growing a small celeriac is not really worth the trouble. It's the sort of root that once you've chopped off the bottom tendrils and you've chopped off the top leaf area, the middle bit is what you eat. And if it's not a sizable root, then there isn't really very much to be eaten. And therefore, every year I found that you need to grow these as wide apart as you can, given the space that you're prepared to give them. And you need a fairly well developed plant before you put it into the ground. And it can be a fairly long growing season, but it's a fine line, because once it gets wet and also cold, then those roots are prone to being eaten by slugs or infiltrated by small worms. So it's a balancing act. If you get it right, the outcome is fantastic. A large celeriac that's a brilliant taste to add to so many different meals. But it really is about perfecting your approach, and every year, as I say, I learn a little bit more. So this year the plants are going to be sizable before I put them in the ground, and they're also going to be probably even more separated, space between them, than I've ever done before, because it's no good having a whole load of very small celeriac. I'd rather have a few really good ones. So if you're growing celeriac, I hope that helps. I did notice then that my house tomatoes have probably got to the point where they need potting on, so they're next on my list. Okay, so we've got 3 house potted up, and I'll pop those up again. I found that if you keep potting them up, you get that much bigger a plant, so much healthier. So they'll go from here into another pot, and then its final pot, and all the rest of these are money maker. So just a tip, 1 label in for the money maker, and the 3 individual ones labeled as house. Saves you on a few labels. So what else is there? I don't think the broccoli's ready for doing yet, and the runner beans will be fine. These are cucumbers, so quite possibly worth potting on a couple of these now that they've got this main leaf, with the same aim of getting a bigger plant before it finally goes into its resting position. And along here I've got way too many celeriac left, as you can see, just overdid it, and sprouts still got a way to go. So I think probably I could pot on the rocket, but given they're in root trainers, I'm probably going to let those develop and put them in as a plug. So I think the only thing I've got left to pot on really is those few cucumbers, so we'll give them a go. Right, it's time for carrots. So I did this preparation the other day, just put this small layer of, a thin layer of compost on top. I've watered it a couple of times in the interest of getting some moisture down a bit lower. And normally I take a deep area to plant into and fill it with compost. But I'm not going to do that this year. It's worked for me, but I want to try something different. I want to try just planting into the surface and allowing the carrots to find their way down, because this soil now, apart from this thin layer I've put on top, is now well used, and I think that probably the carrots will search for goodness by going down. At least that's the theory, and it's always good fun to experiment. So I'm quite simply going to make myself some marks in the bed and make a bit of a grid really, and then sow at all the points where it crosses. So you get the idea. It's very rudimentary setting out, but it does help to get a bit of space, because what I'm going to end up doing is planting multiple seeds into these junctions, and I'll wait for them to germinate, and I'll take the strongest plant and simply clip off by cutting the stem of the seedlings that are smaller. So just need to get my seeds into those cross points. So here's my seed. It is sweet candle. It's an F1 variety, and I don't normally grow F1 apart from carrots, although I have done my sprouts this year based on recommendations. So I'm just going to put a couple at each of this junction, because I don't want one that has nothing in it, and that tends to happen because carrot seed, at least I find, is quite difficult to germinate, and therefore you can sometimes risk having a dud spot, which is a pain because it results in you having to then move a seedling, and moving carrot seedlings is almost as bad as not having one in the first place, because they do not like to be moved. So there's a fair few going in to these points, and I'm hopeful that they'll succeed, or at least one or two of them will. Let's see, one there. And if I do get a dud junction, then I'll just move one of the seedlings that's a bit weaker and move that across, and that's the way it will work. That's the plan anyway. So I'm just simply going to cover over these very casually. No real attention to depths and things. I just want to cover them over, and I find that that's sufficient for them to get going. And sweet candle will keep for a very long time. I've managed to still be harvesting these carrots into September or October. Of course, they're inside, which gives them protection from pests, although I tend to get a little bit of damage to the root each year, but nothing that's too serious, and ultimately I can remove that in the cooking process. So there we go. I'll give it a very light watering, and fingers crossed we'll have more sweet candle carrots this year. So I'll set myself out a load of sort of intermediate sized pots, and I'm going to pot on my tomatoes, which haven't been in these pots for that long, but this needs to move on as fast as I can possibly make it. I've left my tomatoes reasonably late in the season, and this is one way of catching up before you put them in their final large pot or into a grow bag or something of that nature. Just adding them to this slightly larger pot will enable the roots to move out to the sides and just promote the growth of the plant. And it's a really good example. If you look at that, and that's not in its final pot, it's a really healthy plant. It may have started a bit earlier, but it's flourishing because it's got the space. So I'm going to do that with all these. And the important thing is you're not wasting any compost, because the whole compost, of course, goes into the larger pot, and therefore not a bit of it is wasted. So I'm going to fill those up and get my tomatoes into big pots. very long. I'm going to leave this one so that we get a comparison. I'll pop him down with the others down here. That's not quite as light, so I don't want to penalise him in any way. Let's put him there for now. There we go. And you can see they potted on nicely, and I don't know, it's like an illusion, they already look bigger, but I'm pleased I've got those potted on. So that just leaves me to cover this over with cool weather at nights. If I want this to germinate well, it'll just help if I can get some cover over on it. So I'm just going to use these old screens that I've got. These used to be part of a greenhouse. One there. I rounded the corners off on these because it's so easy to stick them into the polytunnel and put that one there. That'll just help keep the warmth in. Well, that's me done for today. It's been a rainy day, but it's not mattered. Got plenty done. Hope you've got loads done too. See you in the next one. Good times.